Ambassador Richardson stepped out of his black diplomatic car, adjusting his formal uniform under the scorching afternoon sun. The grand palace gates of the small European nation towered before him, adorned with golden eagles and ancient family crests that spoke of centuries of royal tradition. This was his first official visit as the newly appointed international officer, and he was determined to make the right impression. The palace courtyard buzzed with activity as servants hurried about their duties, their footsteps echoing against the marble stones. Richardson had spent weeks preparing for this moment, studying the local customs and protocols that governed diplomatic interactions in this proud nation. His briefcase contained important trade agreements that could strengthen relations between their countries for decades to come. As he walked toward the main entrance, Richardson noticed a young palace guard standing at attention near the ornate doorway. The guard appeared to be no more than 25 years old, with a crisp uniform that bore the royal insignia. His posture was perfect, his rifle held with military precision and his eyes stared straight ahead with unwavering focus. Richardson had been told that palace guards in this country were among the most disciplined soldiers in Europe. They underwent years of rigorous training and were sworn to protect the royal family with their lives. These guards were known for their absolute loyalty and their strict adherence to military protocol. The ambassador approached the entrance with confidence, his polished shoes clicking against the stone pathway. In his previous diplomatic postings, he had grown accustomed to the formal gestures of respect that came with his position. Military personnel would salute, civilians would bow slightly, and everyone understood the importance of showing proper deference to visiting dignitaries. However, as Richardson drew closer to the guard, he noticed something peculiar in the young soldier's expression. While the guard maintained his professional stance, there was a subtle intensity in his eyes that the ambassador had not expected. It was not defiance exactly, but rather a quiet strength that seemed to run deeper than mere military training. The palace staff had been informed of Richardson's arrival, and several officials waited inside to greet him. The ambassador knew that this meeting could determine the success of future negotiations between their nations. Everything needed to go perfectly, and that included receiving the proper military courtesies from the palace guard. Richardson's assistant had reminded him earlier that morning about the importance of protocol in this particular country. The royal family took great pride in their military traditions, and any perceived slight or disrespect could damage diplomatic relations. The ambassador was well aware that his actions would be watched and analyzed by numerous officials who would report back to their superiors. As he prepared to pass by the guard, Richardson straightened his shoulders and assumed the bearing of a high-ranking international officer. He had served in the military himself before entering diplomatic service, and he understood the language of rank and authority that governed such interactions. The moment had arrived for Richardson to put the palace guard in his place and demonstrate the proper respect due to a visiting ambassador. He was about to issue a command that he believed would showcase his authority and set the tone for the entire diplomatic mission. Little did he know that the guard's response would challenge everything he thought he understood about respect, dignity, and true strength. Richardson stopped directly in front of the palace guard, close enough to see the individual threads in the young man's immaculate uniform. The ambassador's voice carried the tone of authority he had perfected over years of diplomatic service as he issued his command. "Soldier, you will salute me immediately," Richardson declared, his words echoing off the palace walls. "I am Ambassador Richardson, representing my nation in an official capacity, and you will show the proper respect." The guard's eyes shifted slightly to meet Richardson's gaze, but his body remained perfectly still. Not a muscle moved, not even a twitch of acknowledgement. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire, filled with tension that seemed to crackle in the warm afternoon air. Richardson felt his face flush with embarrassment and anger. In all his years of diplomatic service, he had never encountered such blatant disrespect from a military person. The guard's refusal to salute was not just a personal slight, but a potential insult to his entire country and everything it represented. "Did you hear me, soldier?" Richardson's voice rose slightly, though he tried to maintain his diplomatic composure. "I ordered you to salute. This is a direct command from a visiting international officer." The young guard finally spoke, his voice calm and measured despite the tension of the moment. "Sir, I heard your command clearly and I understand your position as an ambassador. His words were respectful but firm, carrying no trace of fear or nervousness. Richardson waited for the salute to follow, certain that his clarification of authority would resolve the situation. However, the guard continued speaking, and his next words would shake the ambassador's understanding of military protocol to its core. However, "Sir, I cannot and will not salute you," the guard stated with quiet conviction, "not because I do not respect your diplomatic position, but because of something far more important than military rank or international authority." The ambassador's jaw dropped slightly. He had expected many possible responses from the guard, perhaps confusion about protocol, or even a delayed reaction due to nervousness. But outright refusal, delivered with such calm certainty, was completely beyond his experience. "You cannot refuse a direct order," Richardson sputtered, his diplomatic training warring with his growing indignation. "There are consequences for insubordination, young man. Your commanding officers will hear about this incident." The guard's expression softened slightly, but his resolve remained unshakable. "Sir, I am prepared to face any consequences for my actions. My commanding officers are well aware of my principles, and they know that I would never disobey an order without the most serious of reasons." By now, several palace staff members had noticed the commotion near the entrance. They watched from a respectful distance, their faces showing a mixture of concern and curiosity. Some whispered quietly among themselves, clearly aware that they were witnessing something highly unusual. Richardson glanced around nervously, realizing that his diplomatic mission was already in jeopardy before it had even begun. The last thing he needed was for word of this incident to reach the royal family or the media. International incidents had been sparked by far less significant misunderstandings. "Then tell me," Richardson demanded, his voice tight with frustration, "what possible reason could justify such disrespect to a visiting ambassador? What could be more important than following military protocol?" The guard took a barely perceptible breath before answering, and Richardson sensed that whatever came next would explain everything. The young soldier's next words would reveal a truth that would humble the ambassador and teach him a lesson about real honor that no diplomatic training could have prepared him for. The young guard looked directly into Richardson's eyes with a dignity that seemed far beyond his years. "Sir, I cannot salute you because I have no right hand to offer that salute," he said simply, his voice carrying no trace of self-pity or anger. Richardson's eyes instinctively moved to the guard's right side, where the sleeve of his uniform hung empty, pinned neatly against his body. In his focus on demanding respect and asserting authority, the ambassador had completely failed to notice this crucial detail. The realization hit him like a physical blow. "I lost my right arm 2 years ago while serving my country in a peacekeeping mission," the guard continued with quiet dignity. "I was helping to evacuate civilians from a war zone when an explosion took my arm and nearly took my life. The doctors said I would never serve in the military again." The ambassador felt his anger dissolving into something much more complex, a mixture of shame, respect, and profound humility. He had been so concerned with protocol and his own importance that he had failed to see the person standing before him as anything more than a uniform to be commanded. "But sir," the guard went on, "I fought to return to service because protecting this palace and serving my country means everything to me. My commanding officers created a special position for me here because they knew that my dedication had not diminished with the loss of my limb." Richardson found himself struggling to speak. The words of authority and demand that had come so easily just moments before now seemed completely inappropriate. He was beginning to understand that he was in the presence of someone whose sacrifice and commitment made his own achievements pale in comparison. "Cannot perform a traditional military salute," the guard explained, "but I can offer you something that I believe carries far more meaning." With his left hand, he slowly and deliberately placed it over his heart, then gave a respectful bow of his head. The gesture was simple, but it carried a power and sincerity that no regulation salute could have matched. Richardson realized that this young man was offering him the deepest respect possible, not because of rank or protocol, but as one human being honoring another. "I apologize if my inability to salute has caused any diplomatic concerns," the guard said. "It was never my intention to show disrespect to you or your country. I hope you can understand that my response comes from my physical limitations, not from any lack of honor or discipline." Several palace staff members who had been watching from a distance began to understand what was happening. Some of them knew the guard's story, and they watched with obvious pride as he handled the situation with such grace and dignity. They had witnessed many interactions between officials and the palace guards, but none quite like this. Richardson felt a profound shift in his perspective as he looked at the young man before him. This guard had given more for his country than most people ever would, yet he stood there apologizing for not being able to offer a simple salute. The ambassador realized that he had just learned something about true service and sacrifice that no diplomatic academy could have taught him. The silence between them was no longer tense or uncomfortable. Instead, it had become a moment of mutual understanding and respect. Richardson knew that his response to this revelation would define not only the rest of his diplomatic mission, but also the kind of man he wanted to be. In that moment, the ambassador understood that the guard's inability to salute was not a sign of disrespect, but rather a testament to a courage and dedication that deserved the highest honor imaginable. Ambassador Richardson stood in stunned silence for several long moments, processing the magnitude of what he had just learned. The formal diplomatic composure he had worn like armor began to crack, revealing the genuine human being beneath the title and uniform. His entire perspective on the situation had been turned completely upside down. "What is your name, soldier?" Richardson asked softly, his voice now carrying none of the commanding tone from before. The question came from a place of respect rather than authority, marking a fundamental shift in their interaction. "Private First Class Marcus Steele, sir," the guard replied, maintaining his professional bearing despite the emotional weight of the conversation. "I have been serving at this palace for 8 months now, and I consider it the greatest honor of my life." Richardson found himself studying the young man's face more carefully now, seeing details he had missed in his earlier rush to assert dominance. There were faint scars along Marcus's jaw, evidence of the trauma he had survived. His left hand, which he had placed over his heart, bore calluses from adapting to perform tasks that once required 2 hands. "Private Steele," Richardson said, and then paused, searching for words that felt adequate to the moment. "I owe you an apology that goes far deeper than military protocol. I made assumptions about you without taking the time to see who you really are." The ambassador's admission of fault rippled through the small crowd of palace staff who had been watching the encounter. In their experience, high-ranking officials rarely acknowledged their mistakes so publicly or so honestly. Some of them exchanged glances of surprise and approval. "Sir, there is no need for an apology," Marcus responded with characteristic grace. "You could not have known about my situation, and your expectation of a salute was entirely reasonable given your position and the circumstances." But Richardson shook his head firmly. "No, Private Steele. My expectation was based on my own need to feel important, rather than on any genuine understanding of military respect or honor. You have shown me what real dignity looks like." The ambassador took a step closer to Marcus, close enough that their conversation became more private despite the watching eyes around them. "Tell me about the mission where you were injured," he said. "I would like to understand what happened if you are willing to share." Marcus glanced briefly at the palace staff, then back to Richardson. "It was a humanitarian mission in a conflict zone," he began. "My unit was assigned to help evacuate civilians from a city under siege. We had been working for 3 days straight, moving families to safety through dangerous territory." The young guard's voice took on a distant quality as he recalled the events. "On the 3rd day, we received word that there were still children trapped in a collapsed school building. The area was being heavily shelled, but we could not leave those children behind." Richardson listened intently, beginning to understand the caliber of person he was speaking with. This was not just a soldier following orders, but someone who had risked everything for strangers in need. "My team and I went into the building," Marcus continued. "We found 6 children all alive but trapped under debris. We managed to get 5 of them out safely. But as I was carrying the last child to safety, an artillery shell hit the building." The guard paused, and Richardson could see the weight of the memory in his eyes. "The explosion threw us both clear of the collapsing structure. The child survived without serious injury, but the debris severed my right arm. My teammates said I never let go of that little girl, even when I was unconscious." Richardson felt a tightness in his throat as he absorbed the story. This young man had literally given part of himself to save a child he had never met. The sacrifice was so profound that the ambassador's earlier demand seemed almost absurd in comparison. "That child," Richardson said quietly, "is she safe now?" Marcus's face brightened for the first time since their conversation began. "Yes, sir. She and her family were successfully relocated to a refugee camp and eventually resettled in safety. I received a letter from her mother last month, thanking me and telling me that the little girl is now attending school and doing well." In that moment, Richardson realized he was looking at a true hero, someone who had paid a tremendous personal price to serve others and who continued to serve with unwavering dedication despite his sacrifice. Without hesitation, Ambassador Richardson stepped back and brought his right hand to his forehead in a crisp, formal military salute directed at Private Marcus Steele. The gesture was precise and held with unwavering respect, lasting longer than protocol typically required. The watching palace staff fell completely silent, recognizing the extraordinary nature of what they were witnessing. "Private Steele," Richardson said while maintaining his salute, "it is my honor to salute you, a true hero who has given more for his country and humanity than most of us could ever imagine. Your sacrifice and continued service represent the very best of what it means to be a soldier." Marcus's eyes widened in surprise at this unexpected turn of events. In all his months of service at the palace, he had never seen a high-ranking official, let alone an international ambassador, salute a palace guard. The gesture was so contrary to normal protocol that it bordered on the revolutionary. "Sir, I cannot accept such honor," Marcus protested, his voice thick with emotion. "I was simply doing my duty as a soldier. Any member of my unit would have done the same thing in those circumstances." But Richardson held his salute firm and spoke with conviction. "Private Steele, what you did went far beyond duty. You risked your life for strangers, and when that risk became reality, you never stopped serving your country. That kind of dedication deserves recognition from every person who benefits from your sacrifice." The ambassador finally lowered his salute, but his expression remained one of deep respect and admiration. "I want you to know that when I return to my country, I will be telling your story to everyone who will listen. The world needs to hear about people like you." Marcus stood straighter, if that were possible, clearly moved by the ambassador's words and actions. "Sir, your recognition means more to me than any medal or commendation ever could. To know that my service has touched someone of your stature gives new meaning to everything I have endured." The crowd of palace staff began to applaud quietly, their faces showing a mixture of pride and emotion. Many of them had worked alongside Marcus for months, witnessing his daily dedication and positive attitude despite his challenges. Seeing him receive such recognition from an international dignitary filled them with satisfaction and joy. Richardson glanced around at the gathered staff, then back to Marcus. "Private Steele, I have a request to make, and I hope you will consider it carefully." The ambassador's tone became more formal, but retained its warmth and respect. "Yes, sir, what can I do for you?" Marcus replied, genuinely curious about what the ambassador might ask of him. "I am scheduled to meet with your king and several government officials today about trade agreements and diplomatic cooperation," Richardson explained. "I would like your permission to share your story with them, not as an example of military service, but as an example of the character and values that make this nation worthy of the strongest possible friendship with my country." Marcus considered the request carefully, understanding its implications. Having his personal story shared at such a high level of government was both an honor and a responsibility that he had never anticipated. "Sir, if you believe that my experience can somehow contribute to better relations between our countries, then you have my full permission to share whatever details you think appropriate," Marcus replied. "I would be proud to know that my service might help build bridges between nations." Richardson nodded with satisfaction and genuine gratitude. "Thank you, Private Steele. Your story will be the foundation of everything I discussed today. When leaders hear about the caliber of people who serve this nation, they cannot help but want to strengthen the bonds between our countries." The ambassador reached into his briefcase and pulled out a small ceremonial pin from his own country, bearing the national emblem. "Private Steele, I would like you to have this as a token of respect from one soldier to another. It represents the friendship between our nations and my personal admiration for your service." As Richardson prepared to enter the palace for his scheduled meetings, he knew that everything about his diplomatic mission had changed in the span of a few minutes. All because one brave young man had taught him the true meaning of honor and service. 3 hours later, Ambassador Richardson emerged from the palace with a spring in his step that had been absent when he first arrived. His meetings with the king and government officials had exceeded every expectation, largely because of the story he had shared about Private Marcus Steele. The tale of the young guard's sacrifice and dedication had set a tone of mutual respect and admiration that made every subsequent discussion more productive and meaningful. Marcus was still at his post, maintaining the same perfect bearing he had displayed all day. When he saw the ambassador approaching, he straightened slightly and offered the same gesture he had given earlier, his left hand over his heart, accompanied by a respectful nod of his head. "Private Steele," Richardson called out as he drew near, "I wanted to thank you before I departed. Your story was indeed the foundation of everything we accomplished today. The king himself was deeply moved when I told him about your service and sacrifice." Marcus's eyes showed surprise and curiosity. "The king, sir? You spoke to His Majesty about me?" "I did," Richardson confirmed with a broad smile, "and His Majesty asked me to convey his personal gratitude for your continued service. He said that soldiers like you are the reason he is proud to rule this nation." The ambassador paused, then continued with even greater enthusiasm. "But that is not all, Private Steele. The trade agreements we discussed today will include provisions for a new veteran support program, inspired directly by your example. We are going to work together to ensure that wounded soldiers from both our countries receive the best possible care and opportunities to continue serving if they choose." Marcus stood speechless for a moment, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what the ambassador was telling him. His personal story had somehow contributed to international policy that would help countless other veterans. The impact was far beyond anything he could have imagined when he first put on his uniform that morning. "Sir, I do not know what to say," Marcus finally managed. "To think that my experience might help other soldiers is more meaningful than any personal recognition could ever be." Richardson nodded approvingly. "That reaction, Private Steele, is exactly why your story was so powerful in our discussions today. Your focus has always been on serving others, not on yourself. That kind of character cannot be taught or manufactured. It simply exists in certain exceptional people." The ambassador glanced at his watch and realized that his car would be arriving soon to take him to the airport. "I have one final request, Private Steele, and I hope you will agree to it." "Of course, sir. What can I do?" Marcus replied without hesitation. "In 6 months, my country will be hosting an international conference on veteran affairs and military cooperation," Richardson explained. "I would like to invite you to attend as an honored guest and speaker. Your perspective and experience would be invaluable to military leaders and politicians from dozens of countries." Marcus considered the invitation carefully, understanding that accepting would mean stepping far outside his comfort zone and normal duties. However, he also recognized the opportunity to potentially help other veterans on an international scale. "Sir, if my commanding officers approve and if you truly believe my contributions would be valuable, then I would be honored to accept your invitation," Marcus said. "The chance to help other soldiers would make any personal discomfort worthwhile." Richardson extended his left hand to Marcus, recognizing that this was the appropriate gesture given the guard's situation. Marcus grasped it firmly and they shook hands with mutual respect and genuine friendship. "Private Steele, you have taught me more about honor, service, and dignity in one afternoon than I learned in years of diplomatic training," Richardson said. "I came here today thinking I was going to command respect, but instead I discovered what respect really means." As Richardson's car pulled up to take him away, he turned back one final time. "Private Steele, when people ask me about the most memorable moment of my diplomatic career, I will tell them about the day a palace guard changed my understanding of what it truly means to serve." Marcus watched the ambassador's car disappear down the palace drive, then returned to his duties with a renewed sense of purpose. He had begun the day as a simple palace guard doing his job, but he was ending it as an international symbol of courage and dedication. More importantly, he had learned that sometimes the greatest impact comes not from grand gestures or dramatic moments, but from simply standing firm in one's principles and treating every person with dignity and respect. The other palace staff who had witnessed the encounter throughout the day looked at Marcus with even greater admiration than before. They had always known he was special, But now they understood that his influence extended far beyond the palace walls to touch the lives of people around the world.